Tertullian wrote, "What had been laid to waste in ruin by this sex was by the same sex reestablished in salvation." Eve had believed the serpent, Mary believed Gabriel. That which the one destroyed by believing, the other by believing set straight. Said differently, Eve got us in a real mess. Mary fixed it. Today's gospel brings us Mary of Nazareth just after the Annunciation, having said yes. Let it be with me according to your word. The angel Gabriel has departed her, and her spontaneous canticle, her song, bursts forth in response to her cousin Elizabeth's greeting. Remember, Elizabeth is pregnant with John the Baptist. And though Mary doesn't dwell on her own blessings long, she quickly turns her attention to those who are oppressed. It's really all too easy to blunt and soften the edges of Mary and her song and spiritualize her words' meaning. Growing up Catholic and attending an evangelical Christian school at the same time, my faith formation had one foot in a very Protestant world and one in a very Roman Catholic world. And Mary, more specifically, how we relate to her, how we learn from her, how we encounter her, can be tricky, tricky business. How do you solve a problem like Maria? How do you catch a cloud and pin it down? Or elevate her so far off the floor, is she human? I think that's kind of the problem with Mary. Some people feel perpetually incapable of living up to this impossible idea of the Virgin Mother, perpetually virgin. Catholic dogma teaches that she was born of the Immaculate Conception, and that refers to her conception, that she was born free from the stain of original sin. And tomorrow, our Catholic siblings will celebrate the Feast of the Assumption. Their belief that when Mary was at the end of her earthly life, she was assumed, body and spirit, into heaven. For us as Presbyterians, we go in the opposite direction. Not quite sure what to do with her, being very careful around veneration and adoration. We don't talk about her. We're very careful to understand she is not God, certainly never to be prayed to. We solve the problem that way. Some people get so wrapped around the axle of the word virgin and virgin birth that they throw the entire baby out with the bathwater and think this whole thing is a bunch of hooey before we get out of the first chapter of Luke. So in the end, sometimes our efforts to correct lead to overcorrection, and today's solutions create tomorrow's problems, right? In the end, Mary's been relegated to the sidelines and or put in a teeny tiny box, Mary, meek and mild. But, as we just read, that's simply not the Mary of the Magnificat. Mary's story is a call story. It is a story about what happens when God calls unsuspecting people into God's service. I hope in sitting with it today, we can reframe how we hear what Mary has to offer us theologically and spiritually. Her song is courageous. Her song is revolutionary, and she declares unflinchingly that God chooses sides. God chooses sides so that all might be included, so that we can proclaim the greatness of a God who chooses each and every one of us, each and every day. No wonder this courageous woman was chosen to be the mother of the chosen one. I like to think that Jesus must have learned some of these things from his mother. Could we say He got it from his mama? Mary is the God-bearer, Theotokos in Greek, the human woman who allowed Jesus, fully human, fully divine, to be born into the world. We would do well to remember that it was her body broken, her blood shed for him, so that his body could be broken and his blood shed for us. Meister Eckhart, a medieval mystic and theologian, said, "We are all meant to be mothers of God, bearers of God. What good is it to me if Mary is full of grace, if I am not also full of grace? What good is it to me for the Creator to give birth to his Son if I do not also give birth to him in my time, in my culture?" So it begs the question for us this morning, what does it mean for each of us to be bearers of God? We so often feel that we have to transcend our bodies to realize spirituality, that we must crucify the flesh in order to ascend. Mary teaches us that the gynecology of God includes and embraces our bodies, specifically and especially the parts of women's bodies that are often used to criminalize or devalue women, that space is holy ground. It is the sacred Genesis space in which God chose Mary, Mary's womb, to be the vessel through which the eternal Son of God would come into the world. God Emmanuel, God with us, God incarnate. This young girl of lowly birth, pregnant with an explanation and a story about an angel that absolutely no one is going to buy, unapologetically and even brazenly begins her canticle declaring that she's highly favored by God, that God delights in her as she is. Nothing to fix, nothing to change, nothing to earn. Just as she is. That's God's foundational witness. Delighting in her as she is. And in this canticle, she reveals to us that she has a deep faith formation. Her knowledge of the Hebrew scriptures, of the women who've gone before her, is extensive. She knows the history of her people. And actually, the Annunciation, in many ways, takes her out of that safe, familiar spiritual territory into the unknown, into the mystery of God. Like Mary, when our inherited beliefs collide with the messy circumstances of our lives, we have the opportunity to encounter God. Right there in the scandal, to say yes, to build sanctuary together at the rupture. Like us, Mary has 2 feet firmly planted on the ground, and she's saying yes to this labor of love that is ours to live out with joy. The late Rachel Held Evans reminds us that this is the stunning claim of the incarnation, that God has made a home among the very people the world casts out. And in her defiant prayer, Mary, a dark-skinned woman, a refugee, a religious minority in an occupied land, names this reality. Mary shows us that when we say yes to bearing God's love into the world, we are genuine and real participants, creative agents, willing co-workers with God to celebrate and bear God into a needy world. Your yes is needed. Your yes is yours and yours alone to give. All of heaven waits, like with Mary, for you to say yes. Like Mary, may we say yes. May we hear God's call and answer, yes. Let it be with me according to your word. May we be open and receptive to partnering with God for the healing of the world, so that as an act of love, an act of obedient, loving heartfulness, we might invite God to make a home in us, in our lives, and with us share life with the world as we live in the grace that abounds when we say yes to love. Amen.